For 35 years, I poured my heart into building a life for my family in Riverside Hills, never imagining that my own daughter-in-law would throw me out to make room for her parents. But what Bethany didn't know was that I secretly owned the very house she was kicking me out of. And the next morning, I'd be walking through that front door as her new landlord. Hold up, I'm curious where you're listening from. And if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. My name is Dorothy Whitfield, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be writing this story, I would have laughed. Back then, I was just a proud mother watching my son Cameron marry the woman of his dreams in our beautiful garden in Riverside Hills. Bethany Sinclair seemed perfect for him. Ambitious, well-educated, charming enough to light up any room she entered. I welcomed her into our family with open arms, treating her like the daughter I'd never had. The house where Cameron grew up, where we celebrated every birthday and holiday, had been in the Whitfield family for 3 generations. My late husband, Thomas, and I had worked tirelessly to pay it off, transforming it from a modest 2-story colonial into something truly special. We'd added the wraparound porch, renovated the kitchen with granite countertops and custom cabinets, and created a master suite that could rival any luxury hotel. The property sat on nearly 2 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, complete with a rose garden where Thomas proposed to me 40 years ago. When Thomas passed away from cancer 3 years ago, I made what I thought was a generous decision. Instead of keeping the house solely in my name, I transferred the deed into a family trust, with myself as the trustee and Cameron as the beneficiary. My reasoning was simple. I wanted my son to feel secure, to know that his childhood home would always be his inheritance. What I didn't tell anyone, not even Cameron, was that as the trustee, I retained complete control over the property. I could revoke his beneficiary status at any time, for any reason. I never imagined I'd need that power. After the wedding, it seemed natural for Cameron and Bethany to move in with me. The house was enormous, easily accommodating all of us, and I genuinely enjoyed having family around again. The silence after Thomas's death had been deafening, and having young voices filling the halls brought life back to the place. I gave them the entire east wing, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a private sitting area. It was practically an apartment within the house. I bent over backwards to make Bethany feel welcome. When she mentioned loving Italian food, I took cooking classes to learn how to make authentic pasta from scratch. When she complained that her old bedroom furniture looked shabby next to my antiques, I spent nearly $15,000 redecorating their space with pieces from her favorite furniture store. When she mentioned she wanted to host dinner parties for her corporate friends, I not only encouraged it, but handled all the preparation, serving elaborate meals and serving them myself like hired help. Looking back, I can see how I enabled what was coming. Every time Bethany made a subtle criticism about the house, like, the wallpaper in the hallway is so dated, or that chandelier really needs to be updated, I took notes and made changes. When Bethany mentioned that her parents, Harold and June Sinclair, lived in a cramped apartment across town and struggled with the rent, I immediately invited them for extended visits. They'd stay for weeks at a time, and I'd cook for them, do their laundry, and chauffeur them around town for their appointments. The Sinclairs were a study in polite condescension. Harold had worked as a middle manager at a paper company for 30 years before being laid off at 58. He never found steady work again, surviving on odd jobs and unemployment benefits. June had been a secretary at a dental office until arthritis forced her into early retirement. They weren't bad people, exactly, but they carried themselves with an air of entitlement that made my skin crawl. During their visits, they'd make pointed comments about how lucky Cameron was to have such a comfortable setup, always delivered with the tone that suggested I should be doing more. "Dorothy, dear," June would say, settling into my favorite armchair like she owned it, "you've really done well for yourself. This house must be worth quite a fortune these days. Cameron and Bethany are so fortunate to have such security." Harold would nod along, adding, Yes, it's wonderful when family takes care of family. Not everyone is blessed with such generous circumstances. I should have seen the warning signs. The way Bethany's eyes would light up when her parents praised the house. How she'd started referring to certain rooms as ours rather than yours. The increasing frequency of comments about how the house was too big for one person and how it made sense for the younger generation to take charge of these kinds of responsibilities. But I was blinded by my desire to be the perfect mother-in-law. When Cameron lost his job at the marketing firm last year, I didn't hesitate to cover their expenses. Groceries, utilities, car payments, Bethany's student loans. I handled it all without complaint. When Bethany mentioned that her parents were facing eviction from their apartment, I opened my home to them again, this time indefinitely.
They just need a little time to get back on their feet, Bethany had explained, her eyes wide with what I thought was genuine gratitude. Maybe just a few months until Dad finds something steady. Those few months stretched into 8, then 12. Harold and June settled into the guest suite like permanent residents, making no effort to find new housing or contribute to household expenses. They'd hold court in my living room every evening, the television volume cranked up so loud I couldn't hear myself think in my own home. June would rearrange my kitchen to suit her preferences, moving my carefully organized spice rack and replacing my favorite coffee with the cheap brand she preferred. The final straw should have been last Christmas when I overheard June on the phone with someone saying, "Oh yes, we're living in quite the estate now. Bethany's mother-in-law has been so generous, letting us stay in her house. Though between you and me, at her age, she probably appreciates having younger people around to help manage such a large property." But even then, I swallowed my pride and said nothing. I told myself that family meant making sacrifices, that Thomas would have wanted me to be generous with his son and daughter-in-law. I convinced myself that once Harold found work, they'd move out and things would return to normal. I had no idea that Bethany and her parents had been planning something entirely different. I didn't know about the late-night conversations where they discussed how wasteful it was for an elderly woman to live alone in such a large house. I didn't hear them calculating the property's value or researching how to encourage elderly relatives to transition to more appropriate living situations. I was completely unprepared for what happened on that Tuesday morning in March, when I made the mistake of mentioning that I'd been feeling a bit lonely lately and might enjoy living in a smaller place someday. I thought I was making casual conversation over breakfast. I had no idea I was handing them the ammunition they'd been waiting for. What I also didn't know was that my late husband Thomas, in his infinite wisdom, had left me one final gift, a piece of information that would change everything in the days to come. But that morning, as I scrambled eggs for a family that was about to betray me in the most shocking way possible, I was still just Dorothy Whitfield, the devoted mother-in-law who thought she understood the meaning of family loyalty. I was about to learn just how wrong I could be. We poured our hearts into researching and telling this story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for everyone. Scrambled eggs with chives from my garden, fresh-baked biscuits, and the expensive maple bacon that June had specifically requested during her last grocery list. The March sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the dining room where my family would soon gather. I hummed softly as I worked, still believing in the illusion of domestic harmony. Cameron came down first, already dressed in his interview suit. He'd been job hunting for 8 months now, and I could see the stress weighing on his shoulders. I squeezed his hand as I set his plate down. "How are you feeling about today's interview, sweetheart?" "Nervous," he admitted, managing a weak smile. "It's with Henderson and Associates downtown. The salary would be good enough for us to finally—" He trailed off, glancing toward the stairs where footsteps could be heard descending. Bethany appeared moments later, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wore a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, her power outfit, as she called it. Behind her came Harold and June, both moving with the casual entitlement I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. "Morning, Dorothy," June said, settling into what had once been Thomas's chair at the head of the table. "I hope you remembered, no salt on the eggs today. Harold's blood pressure, you know." I nodded, having prepared his portion separately. "Of course, and I made sure to use the olive oil instead of butter, just as you asked."
Harold grunted his approval while reaching for 3 strips of bacon. Good, good. At my age, you have to be careful about these things. June's been reading about how diet affects longevity. Apparently, people are living much longer these days, sometimes well into their 90s. Something about the way he said it made my stomach flutter with unease, but I dismissed the feeling. I was probably just being oversensitive. As we ate, I mentioned something that had been on my mind lately. I've been thinking about what I might want to do in a few years when I'm older. Sometimes this house feels so large for just one person. I laughed lightly, not noticing how Bethany's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I mean, not anytime soon, of course, but someday I might enjoy something smaller and more manageable. Maybe one of those lovely garden apartments near Clearwater Lake. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table, confused by the sudden tension. Bethany set down her fork carefully. Actually, Mom Dorothy, we've been meaning to talk to you about that exact thing. The formal tone of her voice sent ice through my veins. Mom Dorothy? She only called me that when she was about to say something unpleasant.
Harold and I have been discussing this for months, June interjected, dabbing her mouth with the linen napkin I'd ironed that morning. We're genuinely concerned about you living alone in such a large house. The maintenance, the isolation. It's really not appropriate for someone your age. My age? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm 68, not 88. I'm perfectly capable of— Are you, though? Bethany interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Last week, you forgot to turn off the stove burner. What if there had been a fire? What if something happened to you and we didn't find you for days? I stared at her in shock. I stepped outside for 5 minutes to get the mail. The burner was on the lowest setting under the soup pot. That's exactly what we mean, Harold said, shaking his head gravely. These little incidents add up. June and I have seen it with our own parents. One day they're fine, the next day they're burning down the house or wandering the streets confused. I am not confused, I said firmly, my hands beginning to tremble with anger. And I resent the implication that nobody's saying you're incompetent, Bethany said in that patronizing tone people use with children. We're saying you need support, you need family around you, but this house is far too big for what you actually need. Cameron, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. What exactly are you suggesting? Bethany reached over and took his hand, her wedding ring catching the morning light. We found the perfect solution. There's a lovely senior community called Golden Years Estates about 20 minutes from here. It's not a nursing home, she added quickly, seeing my horrified expression. It's independent living with optional services. You'd have your own apartment, but there would be people around, activities, medical support if needed. You want to put me in a retirement home? The words came out as a croak. We want to ensure your safety and happiness, June said smoothly. And honestly, Dorothy, it would solve everyone's problems. You'd have the social interaction you need. We'd have peace of mind knowing you're cared for. And, I prompted, though I dreaded the answer. Harold cleared his throat. Well, the truth is, June and I can't keep living in that cramped apartment across town. The landlord is raising the rent again, and at our age, moving costs are astronomical. Since Cameron and Bethany are already established here, it would make sense for us to take over the house. The room spun around me. Take over the house? Just temporarily, Bethany said quickly, until we can afford to buy our own place. With Cameron's new job prospects and my promotion at the firm, we'd eventually be able to purchase it from you. Think of us as long-term caretakers. But this is my home, I whispered. Thomas and I built our entire life here. Our memories don't require a specific location, June said dismissively. And frankly, Dorothy, holding on to the past isn't healthy. You need to focus on your future, on what's practical. I turned to Cameron, desperately hoping my son would defend me, would remember the thousands of times I'd defended him. Cameron, you can't seriously be agreeing with this. My son's eyes darted between his wife and me, and I watched him make his choice in real time. Mom, we're only thinking about what's best for everyone. You've been saying yourself that you feel lonely here, and with Dad gone? He swallowed hard. Maybe it is time for a change. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. A change? You mean you want me gone? That's not what anyone is saying, Bethany snapped, her mask of concerned daughter-in-law finally slipping. But since you brought up the subject of downsizing, we thought we should be honest about our own needs. Harold and June deserve to live somewhere comfortable in their golden years. They've worked their entire lives, and they shouldn't have to struggle with rent payments at their age. And what about my golden years? I asked, my voice rising. What about the fact that I've paid for this house, maintained it, opened it to all of you without asking for anything in return? Harold's face darkened. Now you're being selfish, Dorothy. Family takes care of family. We're offering you a solution that works for everyone. Everyone except me. You're being dramatic, June said coldly. Golden Years Estates is a beautiful facility, much nicer than most senior communities. They have a pool, a library, organized trips to the casino. You'd probably be happier there than rattling around in this big empty house. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This conversation is over. This is my house, and I'm not going anywhere. Bethany's expression turned venomous. Actually, Mom Dorothy, I think you need to consider your options more carefully, because if you're really becoming too stubborn to see reason, there are other ways to handle this situation. What does that mean? It means if you're showing signs of cognitive decline, poor judgment, irrational attachment to inappropriate living situations, inability to recognize safety concerns, there are legal steps that can be taken, for your own protection, of course. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. I stared at this woman I'd welcomed as a daughter-in-law, who was now threatening to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my home.
You wouldn't dare. I'd rather not, Bethany said with a cold smile. But if you force our hand... Cameron said nothing. He sat there, staring at his plate, while his wife threatened to destroy his mother's life. That's when I realized the depth of their planning. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment conversation brought on by my casual comment about downsizing. They'd been plotting this for months, maybe longer. They'd been living in my house, eating my food, spending my money, all while scheming to take everything from me. I need some air, I said quietly, walking toward the back door. Dorothy, June called after me, we really should finish discussing the timeline. Golden Years Estates has a waiting list, and we need to put your name down soon if... I slammed the door behind me, cutting off her words. I stood on the back porch, gasping like a drowning woman who'd just broken the surface. My beautiful rose garden stretched before me, the buds just beginning to form on the bushes Thomas and I had planted together for our 10th anniversary. Through the kitchen window, I could hear them resuming their conversation, their voices animated now that the difficult part was over. I caught fragments. Much easier than we thought. Golden Years has a move-in special this month. We should start looking at furniture for the master bedroom. They were dividing up my life like vultures picking at roadkill. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called the one person who'd always given me honest advice, my sister Patricia, who lived 2 states away. Dorothy, what's wrong? You sound terrible. Through tears, I told her everything. The threats, the manipulation, the casual cruelty of people I'd treated like family. Patricia's response was immediate and fierce. Get out of that house, right now. Don't pack, don't explain, just leave. Go to a hotel, anywhere. And Dorothy, call that lawyer Thomas used for the estate planning. Call him today. But where would I go? This is my home. No, Patricia said firmly. That house stopped being your home the moment they decided you didn't deserve to live in it. But Dorothy, remember what Thomas always used to say about keeping your cards close to your chest? Maybe it's time to show them what cards you're really holding. As I hung up, Bethany appeared at the back door.
Dorothy, we really need to finish this conversation. Harold found a moving company that can help you pack this weekend, and I turned to face her, and something in my expression made her step back. I'll be out by tomorrow, I said quietly. She blinked, clearly not expecting such quick capitulation. Oh, well, that's good. Very mature of you. Yes, I said, walking past her into the house. Very mature. What Bethany didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't surrendering. I was repositioning. And tomorrow, when I walked back through that front door, it would be as something they never expected me to be. Their landlord. I walked through the lobby of the Grandview Hotel with my single suitcase, my hands surprisingly steady as I approached the front desk. The young clerk, a girl who couldn't have been older than 25, looked up with a professional smile that faltered slightly when she saw my face. I probably looked like exactly what I was, a woman who just had her world turned upside down. I'd like a room, please, possibly for an extended stay. Of course, ma'am. How long were you thinking? I'm not sure yet. Let's start with a week and see how things develop. As she processed my credit card, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall behind her. I looked older than I had that morning, but there was something else in my eyes, a steely determination that surprised even me. Patricia had been right. It was time to stop playing the victim and start playing the game. After settling into my room, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. David Kellerman, the attorney who'd handled Thomas's estate. He'd also been the one to set up the family trust, though I suspect even he hadn't fully understood my late husband's strategic thinking at the time. Mrs. Whitfield, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today? David, I need to understand something about the trust documents Thomas set up, specifically my authority as trustee over the Riverside Hills property. There was a pause. Is there a problem with the arrangement? I gave him a condensed version of the morning's events, watching through my hotel window as traffic moved along the street. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that mine had just imploded. I see, David said when I finished. Well, Mrs. Whitfield, your husband was quite thorough in his planning. As the trustee, you have complete authority over that property. You can revoke Cameron's beneficiary status at any time for any reason. You can also change the terms of occupancy immediately. Meaning? Meaning that legally, you are the owner of that house. The trust is simply a structure for inheritance planning. If you choose to exercise your authority as trustee, you could serve notice to anyone currently residing there. They would be considered tenants at will, subject to your discretion. I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of the tight knot of helplessness that had been choking me since breakfast. How quickly could that be done?
If you wanted to serve notice today, I could have the papers drawn up within 2 hours. Massachusetts law requires 30 days for eviction proceedings, but given the circumstances, we might be able to argue for immediate possession based on your need to return to your primary residence. Do it, I said without hesitation. All of it. I want them served today. Mrs. Whitfield, are you certain this will permanently alter your relationship with your son? There may be no coming back from this. I thought about Cameron's silence that morning, the way he'd sat there while his wife threatened me with legal action to steal my home. David, I think my relationship with my son ended the moment he chose to let his wife destroy me rather than defend me. I'm not altering anything. I'm just acknowledging what already happened. After hanging up with David, I called Patricia back. How are you holding up? She asked immediately. Better than expected. I'm at the Grandview Hotel and I've just set some wheels in motion. Patricia, do you remember what Thomas used to say about chess? That the key to winning wasn't making the most aggressive moves, it was controlling the board so thoroughly that your opponent didn't realize they'd already lost until it was too late. Exactly. Thomas didn't just set up that trust to avoid probate taxes. He set it up because he knew exactly what kind of people we were dealing with. He saw through Bethany's act years before I did. What do you mean? I walked to the window, looking out over the city where I'd lived my entire adult life. Remember that Christmas dinner 2 years ago when Bethany made that comment about how lucky Cameron was to have such financial security? Thomas barely said anything at the time, But later that night, he told me he thought she was already calculating the value of everything in the house. Thomas always was good at reading people. He was, and he must have suspected that someday I might need protection, even from our own son. The trust gives me all the power while appearing to give Cameron the inheritance. It was brilliant, really. I spent the next hour making phone calls, setting plans in motion that I'd never imagined I'd need. First, I called a locksmith and scheduled them to change all the locks on the house the following morning. Then, I contacted the utilities companies and had all the services transferred back to my name, exclusively. Finally, I called the local police non-emergency line to give them a heads up about a potential civil dispute at my address. By 4 p.m., David called back. "Everything's ready, Mrs. Whitfield. I have a process server standing by. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. "The papers will be served within the hour. They'll have official notice that their occupancy of the property is terminated, effective immediately, with a formal eviction proceeding to begin if they don't voluntarily vacate. I've also included documentation proving your sole ownership of the property through the trust." After hanging up with David, I sat in my hotel room and did something I hadn't done in years. I thought about what I actually wanted for my future, not what everyone else needed from me. For 35 years, my wants were secondary to everyone else's needs. Thomas's career, Cameron's education, Bethany's comfort, her parents' security. When had I stopped mattering in my own life? My phone rang at 5:30 p.m. Cameron's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, what the hell is this?" His voice was shaking with rage and panic. "We just had some guy show up at the door with a legal paper saying we have to leave. He said you're evicting us. This has to be some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake, Cameron." "But you can't evict us. This is our home too. You put the house in the family trust. I'm the beneficiary." "You're the beneficiary if I choose to keep you as the beneficiary. As the trustee, I have the authority to revoke that status at any time, which I just did." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear Bethany shouting in the background, her voice shrill with panic. "Mom, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? Bethany's parents, they can't just—" "That's not my problem anymore. You made it very clear this morning that you wanted me out of the house. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. The house is now free for the people who actually deserve to live there." "But that's us. You deserve exactly what you gave me." "Nothing." Bethany grabbed the phone. "Dorothy, you can't do this. We have rights. We've been living here for years." "As my guests," I said calmly. "Guests who just asked me to leave my own home so you could move your parents in. Well, consider your invitation revoked." "You're insane. We'll fight this. We'll take you to court." "With what money, Bethany? Last I checked, Cameron doesn't have a job, and you spent your savings on that new car you bought last month. Oh, and those legal papers David served you with? They include a clause about a frivolous lawsuit clause. If you try to fight this and lose, you'll be responsible for all my legal fees. David charges $400 an hour." I could hear Harold's voice in the background, growing increasingly agitated. "This is ridiculous. We had an understanding. She agreed to this arrangement."
I agreed to nothing. I called out loudly enough for him to hear. "You assumed, planned, and decided, all without bothering to ask what I actually wanted. Now you get to live with the consequences." Cameron took the phone back. "Mom, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out. Maybe Bethany's parents could find somewhere else to live, and we could—" "Cameron," I interrupted gently, "do you remember what you did this morning when your wife threatened to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my house? She didn't mean, do you remember what you did?" Another long pause. I didn't know what to say. "You didn't say anything. You sat there while the woman you married threatened to destroy your mother's life, and you said nothing. That told me everything I needed to know about where your loyalties lie." "But I love you, Mom. You're my mother." "No, Cameron. I was your ATM. There's a difference. And now the account is closed." I hung up and immediately blocked all their numbers. Then I ordered room service, opened a bottle of wine I'd brought from my personal collection, and began planning my return home. What they didn't know yet
What none of them had bothered to discover in all their scheming was that I wasn't just the legal owner of the house they'd tried to steal. I was also the owner of 3 other rental properties in Riverside Hills that Thomas and I had quietly acquired over the years as investments. Properties that I'd never mentioned to anyone, including Cameron. Properties that generated enough rental income to support me comfortably for the rest of my life without needing to depend on anyone. Tomorrow morning, when I walked back through the front door of my house, I wouldn't be returning as the defeated old woman they'd thrown out. I'd be returning as their landlord, with the power to decide whether they had a roof over their heads or not. But first, I had some shopping to do. New locks, new security system, and maybe some new furniture to replace anything they might decide to damage in their rage. Thomas had always said that the best revenge was living well. Tomorrow, I'd start living very well indeed. As I sipped my wine and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my future. For the first time since Thomas died, I was looking forward to tomorrow. I raised my glass in a toast to my late husband. Thank you for seeing them coming, Thomas, and thank you for making sure I'd have the last laugh. The game was just beginning, and I was finally ready to play. I woke up at 6 a.m. in my hotel room, more refreshed than I had felt in months. The morning light filtered through the curtains as I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one Thomas had always said made me look formidable. Today, I need to look exactly that. The locksmith was already waiting in his van when I pulled into my driveway at 8 a.m. sharp. Through the windows, I could see movement inside the house: frantic packing, hushed arguments, the chaos of people who'd been caught completely off guard. Good. Mrs. Whitfield, the locksmith approached with his toolbox. I'm Ray Morrison. You called about changing all the locks. Every single one, I confirmed, handing him the spare key I'd retrieved from my purse. Front door, back door, side entrance, and the garage. I want everything rekeyed immediately. As Ray began working on the front door, Bethany's face appeared at the living room window. Her hair was disheveled, her usually perfect makeup smeared. She pressed her palm against the glass, mouthing something I couldn't hear and didn't care to understand. The front door opened, and Cameron stepped out onto the porch. He'd clearly been up all night, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled. Mom, please, can we just talk about this? We talked yesterday, Cameron. You and your wife made your position very clear. We were upset. People say things when they're upset that they don't mean. Oh, but you did mean it, Cameron. Every word. You meant it when Bethany threatened to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my house. She didn't mean, do you remember what you did? Harold appeared behind Cameron, his face red with indignation. This is ridiculous, Dorothy. You can't just throw us out on the street like common criminals. I'm not throwing you out on the street, I said pleasantly. I'm simply reclaiming my property. There's a difference. Ray looked up from the lock mechanism. Ma'am, I'll need everyone to step back while I finish this, for security reasons. You heard him, I said to Cameron. Step back. This is insane, Bethany's voice carried from the doorway where she now stood with June beside her. We have nowhere to go. I've already called my lawyer, and he says you can't just... Your lawyer is wrong, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. David. I'd put the call on speaker, and David Kellerman's authoritative voice filled the morning air. Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield. I trust everything is proceeding smoothly. Perfectly. However, the current occupants seem to be under the impression that they have legal grounds to challenge my actions. Could you clarify the situation for them? Certainly. To whom am I speaking? Bethany stepped forward aggressively. This is Bethany Sinclair Whitfield. I'm Dorothy's daughter-in-law, and we've been living in this house for 3 years. She can't just evict us without proper notice.
I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mrs. Sinclair Whitfield. Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield is the sole owner of this property through a legally established trust. As the trustee, she has absolute authority over occupancy. The notice served yesterday was more than adequate under Massachusetts law. But we're family, Cameron interjected desperately. There have to be protections for family members. Being related doesn't grant you any special legal rights to someone else's property, Mr. Whitfield. And given that Mrs. Whitfield has revoked your beneficiary status in the trust, you're now legally considered a tenant at will who has been given notice to vacate. June's face had gone pale. But where are we supposed to live? We gave up our apartment. That was your choice. David's voice remained professionally neutral. It has no bearing on Mrs. Whitfield's property rights. I ended the call and looked at the group of people who'd tried to destroy me less than 24 hours ago. Ray, how much longer? Just finishing up the last lock, Mrs. Whitfield. Another 5 minutes. Harold's composure finally cracked. You spiteful old witch! We offered you a perfectly reasonable arrangement. Harold, I said softly, and something in my tone made him stop mid-sentence. Yesterday, you told me that family takes care of family. You were absolutely right. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking care of myself. This isn't over, Bethany snarled. We'll fight this. We'll expose you for what you really are, a cruel, selfish... Go ahead, I said, maintaining my pleasant tone. Please do tell everyone how you tried to manipulate an elderly woman into giving up her home so your parents could move in rent-free. I'm sure people will be very sympathetic to your cause. Ray stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. All done, Mrs. Whitfield. Here are your new keys. He handed me a small ring with 4 shiny brass keys. I also reset the garage door opener and the security system as you requested. Thank you, Ray. The check will be in the mail tomorrow. As Ray packed up his tools, I walked toward the front door. Cameron stepped into my path. Mom, please, don't do this. I know we hurt you, but we're still family. I stopped and looked into my son's eyes that looked so much like Thomas's but held none of his father's integrity. Cameron, yesterday morning you had a choice. You could have stood up for your mother, or you could have sided with people who wanted to steal her home. You made your choice. Now live with it. But where are we supposed to go? That's not my concern anymore. I stepped around him and inserted my new key into the lock. It turned smoothly and the door opened to reveal my beautiful home, the home I almost lost to their greed and manipulation. Bethany pushed past Cameron. You can't just walk in there. Our belongings are still inside. You have until noon to collect them. That's 4 hours. More than generous, considering. 4 hours? We have 3 years' worth of belongings in there. Then you'd better work quickly. I stepped inside my house and breathed deeply. It smelled like home, like the lavender sachets I kept in the linen closets, like the coffee beans I ground fresh every morning, like the roses Thomas and I had planted together. They hadn't been able to take that away from me. June appeared in the hallway, her arms full of hastily packed clothes. Dorothy, surely we can come to some arrangement. Harold and I could pay rent. To live in my house, the house you tried to steal from me yesterday? I shook my head. I wouldn't rent you a cardboard box in an alley. You're making a huge mistake, Bethany called from upstairs, where she was apparently throwing things into suitcases. Cameron is your only child. When you're old and sick and need help, don't come crying to us. I walked to the bottom of the staircase and called up. Bethany, I'm already old, and yesterday you made it very clear that rather than helping me, you planned to have me declared incompetent and shipped off to a nursing home. So your threat isn't exactly terrifying. Harold appeared at the top of the stairs, his face purple with rage. This is what happens when you spoil ungrateful children. They grow up thinking the world owes them everything. The irony was so thick, I almost laughed. You're absolutely right, Harold. Look how entitled your daughter turned out. For the next 3 hours, I watched them carry their belongings out to a rented moving truck. Boxes of the clothes I'd bought Bethany, the furniture I'd paid for, the electronics and gadgets I'd given them as gifts over the years. They had taken so much from me, yet somehow they'd convinced themselves they were the victims. At one point, Cameron approached me where I sat in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. Mom, I found something you should see. He placed a manila folder on the table in front of me. It's information about Golden Years Estates, the place we talked about yesterday. I drove by this morning and it's actually really nice. They have activities, social programs. I looked up from my newspaper.
Are you seriously trying to sell me on a retirement home right now while you're being evicted from my house? I just thought maybe we could all take some time to cool down and then—
Cameron, I folded my newspaper carefully. Yesterday, you stood by while your wife threatened to destroy my life. Today, you're being removed from my property. And you're still trying to convince me to give up my home and move to a senior facility. Do you understand how that sounds? His face crumpled. I don't know what else to do. Bethany's parents have nowhere to go. We don't have enough money for a deposit on an apartment. I still don't have a job. Those are all consequences of your choices, not my problems to solve. But we're family. No, I said firmly. Family protects each other. Family doesn't try to steal each other's homes. Family doesn't threaten each other with false incompetency claims. You stopped being my family the moment you chose them over me. At exactly noon, I stood up and walked to the front door. Bethany was loading the last box into the truck, her designer outfit now rumpled and stained with sweat. "Time's up," I announced. "We're almost finished," she snapped. "You are finished, all of you. Off my property, now." Harold climbed down from the truck cab. "This isn't over, Dorothy. We'll be back." I smiled and held up my phone. I should mention that I've installed new security cameras throughout the property. If any of you set foot on my land without permission, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. David has already filed the paperwork. Cameron made one last desperate attempt. "Mom, what if we apologized? What if you'd thought of that yesterday before you tried to rob me?" I stepped back inside my house and began to close the door. "Goodbye, Cameron. I hope you find somewhere comfortable to live, somewhere you can afford on your own." I locked the door and watched through the window as they climbed into their truck and drove away. Harold was gesticulating wildly, Bethany was crying, June sat in stony silence, and Cameron kept looking back at the house with an expression of disbelief. As their truck disappeared around the corner, I walked through my house, my beautiful, quiet, peaceful house, and began planning my new life. A life where I would never again mistake being used for being loved. The war was over, and I had won. 3 months later, I stood in my garden on a crisp Saturday morning in June, watching the roses bloom in spectacular fashion. Thomas would have been delighted. This was shaping up to be the best growing season we'd ever had. The peace that had settled over my life still felt almost surreal, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "How's the Queen of the Castle doing today?" I smiled as I typed back, living her best life. And it was true. In the 3 months since I'd reclaimed my home, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Without the constant drain of supporting ungrateful family members, I'd discovered just how comfortable my financial situation actually was. The rental income from my 3 investment properties, combined with Thomas's life insurance and my own savings, meant I was genuinely wealthy, something I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge while I was busy funding everyone else's lifestyle. I'd hired a housekeeper, something I'd never considered while I was too busy being everyone else's housekeeper. Maria came twice a week and was worth every penny, leaving me free to pursue interests I'd abandoned decades ago. I'd rejoined the Riverside Hills Garden Club, started taking watercolor classes at the community center, and even begun volunteering at the local animal shelter. Most surprisingly, I'd discovered I had a talent for property management. My 3 rental properties were now generating significantly more income than they had when I'd left them on autopilot. I'd renovated 2 of them, raising the rent to market value, and found excellent tenants who actually appreciated having a responsive, professional landlord. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become exactly what Bethany and her family now desperately needed, a landlord willing to work with tenants who were struggling. My phone rang, interrupting my morning reverie. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Hello? This is Jennifer Patterson from Clearwater Property Management. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from David Kellerman. He suggested you might be interested in a business opportunity. What kind of opportunity? We're looking for private investors to partner with us on a new affordable housing project. David mentioned you've had some success with rental properties and might be interested in expanding your portfolio. I found myself genuinely intrigued. Tell me more. As Jennifer explained the project, converting a former office building into affordable apartments for seniors and low-income families, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This was something meaningful, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. I'd like to schedule a meeting. Would next Tuesday work for you? After hanging up, I realized what freedom felt like. The freedom to make choices based on what I wanted to do, not what others expected me to do. The freedom to invest my money in causes I believed in rather than people who saw me as a resource to be exploited. My doorbell rang, and I frowned as I walked toward the front door. The security camera showed a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying what looked like a folder.
Can I help you? I asked through the intercom. Mrs. Whitfield, my name is Sandra Chen. I'm a social worker with Riverside County Social Services. I was hoping I could speak with you about a family that's recently come to our attention. I opened the door, curious. What can I do for you? Sandra's expression was professional but sympathetic. We've been working with a family that's been living in their car for the past month, a couple with 3 children ages 8 to 16. They were evicted from their previous housing situation and haven't been able to find anywhere they can afford. Something cold settled in my stomach. What does this have to do with me? The family name is Sinclair Whitfield. The mother mentioned that you might be a relative who could help. I stared at Sandra for a long moment, processing this information. They're living in their car? Yes, ma'am. They've been staying in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner most nights. The children are still attending school, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain any stability for them. Part of me, the part that had been trained for 68 years to sacrifice for family, felt a familiar tug of guilt and responsibility. But a stronger part, the part that had been forged in the fire of their betrayal, remained unmoved. Miss Chen, I'm going to be very direct with you. 3 months ago, that family tried to manipulate me into giving up my home so they could take it over. When I refused, they threatened to have me declared incompetent. They are not homeless because of circumstances beyond their control. They're homeless because they chose to try to steal from someone who loved them instead of building their own life. Sandra's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. So you're not willing to help. I'm not willing to enable them, I corrected. If you give me your card, I'll be happy to make a donation to your organization to help families who genuinely need it. But I won't give a penny directly to people who created their own problems through greed and manipulation. After Sandra left, I called David Kellerman. Dorothy, how are you enjoying your newfound peace and quiet? It's wonderful, David. But I just had an interesting visit from social services. Apparently, Cameron and Bethany are living in their car with her parents. I'm not surprised. Word around town is that they've been unable to find anyone willing to rent to them. Apparently, Bethany's behavior during the eviction process didn't go unnoticed. She made some threats, caused some public scenes. Property managers talked to each other. What about Cameron's job search? From what I hear, not going well. His association with the family's reputation issues isn't helping, and frankly, he's been out of work so long that his skills are becoming obsolete. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Not quite satisfaction, but something close to closure. David, I want to set up a charitable fund.
something that helps families with housing, but with strict vetting to ensure the help goes to people who genuinely need it, not people who created their own problems through greed and manipulation. I'm not surprised. Word around town is that they've been unable to find anyone willing to rent to them. Apparently, Bethany's behavior during the eviction process didn't go unnoticed. She made some threats, caused some public scenes. Property managers talked to each other. What about Cameron's job search? From what I hear, not going well. His association with the family's reputation issues isn't helping, and frankly, he's been out of work so long that his skills are becoming obsolete. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Not quite satisfaction, but something close to closure. David, I want to set up a charitable fund, something that helps families with housing, but with strict vetting to ensure the help goes to people who genuinely need it, not people who created their own problems through greed and manipulation. That's a wonderful idea. I can help you establish the legal framework. That evening, I sat in my sunroom with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mom, please, the kids are sleeping in the car. Can't we work something out?" I stared at the message for a long time. 3 months ago, receiving this would have broken my heart and sent me rushing to help. Now I felt only a distant sadness, not for their situation, but for the choices that had led them there. I typed back, "Cameron, the time to work something out was when your wife was threatening to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my house. You made your choice then. Live with it now." Then I blocked the number and deleted the message. 2 weeks later, I was at the community center for my watercolor class when my instructor, Helen, pulled me aside. "Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I heard through the grapevine that your son's family has been having some difficulties." "That's one way to put it," I replied evenly. "Well, I just wanted you to know that the community has noticed how much you've blossomed since you started focusing on yourself. You seem genuinely happy for the first time in years." She was right. I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. I had my health, my home, my financial security, and my freedom. I had meaningful work through my property investments and volunteer activities. I had friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was alone now, but I wasn't lonely. Loneliness, I'd discovered, was what I'd felt when I was surrounded by people who saw me only as a resource to be used. 6 months after that terrible Tuesday morning when my world had turned upside down, I received an invitation to speak at a local women's group about financial independence for seniors. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of women who were facing their own decisions about family, money, and self-worth, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before.
"The hardest lesson I've learned," I told them, "is that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Sometimes the greatest act of love, both for them and for yourself, is refusing to enable their worst impulses." After my talk, a woman in her 70s approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "My daughter has been pressuring me to sell my house and move in with her family. I've been feeling guilty for wanting to keep my independence, but hearing your story, I think I know what I need to do." That night, I sat in Thomas's favorite chair in our living room, my living room now, and raised a toast to his memory. "Thank you for protecting me, even after you were gone. And thank you for teaching me that sometimes the best way to take care of family is to teach them to take care of themselves." As I settled into bed in my peaceful, quiet house, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. I'd lost a son and gained myself.
I'd lost the burden of supporting ungrateful relatives and gained the freedom to help people who truly deserved it. I'd lost the illusion of family loyalty and gained the reality of self-respect. Some people might say I was cruel, that families should forgive and support each other no matter what. But I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require foolishness, and love doesn't require self-destruction. I'd spent 35 years being the person everyone could count on to sacrifice herself for their benefit. Now, finally, I was someone I could count on to protect my own well-being. And that, I'd discovered, made all the difference in the world.